The Pre-Raphaelites burst upon the English art scene in the mid-19th century. In a youthful act of rebellion, they vowed to counter the stifling predictability of academic art by seeking to recapture the honest simplicity of early Italian painters who had flourished before Raphael, hence, Pre-Raphaelite origins and influences. The Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood was formed in 1848 by a group of 7 young artists, including John Everett Millais, William Holman Hunt, and Dante Gabriel Rossetti. They sealed their pact by adding the initials PRB to paintings. This caused an outcry in the press, largely because of the apparent insult to Raphael, who was regarded as the greatest of all painters. The protests were short-lived, however, after John Ruskin lent his support to the group. Ruskin had advised artists to go to nature, rejecting nothing, selecting nothing, and scorning nothing. The Pre-Raphaelites adopted this principle wholeheartedly, with the landscape settings of their early pictures often depicted in microscopic detail. The 3 main members of the group soon went their separate ways. Hunt turned to religious painting, while Millais joined the art establishment. Rossetti carried the movement forward, influencing Edward Burne-Jones and William Morris. They, in turn, introduced Pre-Raphaelite ideas to a wider audience through the Symbolist, see pages 382-87, and arts and crafts movements. Subjects. The Pre-Raphaelites tackled a wide variety of themes. They shared the Victorian appetite for the color and romance of the Middle Ages, taking themes from Arthurian legend. In spite of these escapist tendencies, they were interested in covering modern issues, such as emigration, prostitution, and religious reform. The group often focused on a moral, or a story, many of which were drawn from literary sources. They avoided classical authors, but Shakespeare, Keats, and Tennyson were popular choices, and Rossetti was passionate about the Italian poet Dante. Eventually, Pre-Raphaelite was used as a tag associated with some of the movement's most iconic images, from imitations of Rossetti's femmes fatales to the pale, androgynous figures in Burne-Jones's designs. Acanthus wallpaper design, by William Morris, 1875. Morris believed that his wallpapers reproduced the charm of the forest inside the home. The Pre-Raphaelites. John Everett Millais. B. Southampton, 1829, D. London, 1896. Millais was a child prodigy, becoming the youngest ever pupil at the Royal Academy Schools, a national art school, founded in 1768 and based in London. His superb technical skills were well suited to the precision that the Pre-Raphaelites sought to achieve. In his early work, Millais opted for literary themes, drawn from Shakespeare, Tennyson, and Keats, and autumnal scenes that were reflections on mortality. Gradually, he abandoned his Pre-Raphaelite roots and veered towards a sentimental style, which was in line with mainstream Victorian taste. Millais had a particular gift for portraying children, and they feature prominently in his most famous pictures, such as The Boyhood of Raleigh, 1870, and Bubbles, 1886. Lifeline. 1840 enters the Royal Academy Schools, aged just 11, 1846 exhibits first picture at the Royal Academy, 1852 completes Ophelia, 1855 marries Effie Gray, Ruskin's ex-wife, 1885 is made a baronet, 1896 elected president of the Royal Academy, 1896 dies in London and is buried in St. Paul's Cathedral. The Blind Girl. The Pre-Raphaelites liked tackling modern issues. This touches on the controversial topics of child vagrancy and treatment of the disabled. 1854-56, oil on canvas, 81 by 62 centimeters, Birmingham Museum and Art Gallery, Birmingham, UK. Closer look. Other senses. The blind girl cannot enjoy the visual beauty of the rainbow, but the way that she is touching the grass and the inclusion of the concertina suggests the sharpness of her other senses. Ophelia. The Pre-Raphaelites painted natural details with painstaking accuracy. In this scene from Shakespeare's Hamlet, Millais sways meticulous in portraying the flowers mentioned in the text and Ophelia herself. The model posed for hours in a bath, eventually catching a severe chill. 1851-52, oil on canvas, 76 by 112 centimeters, Tate, London, UK. William Holman Hunt. B. London, 1827, D. London, 1910. Of all the Pre-Raphaelites, Hunt was the one who remained truest to the group's original principles. From an impoverished background, he worked as a clerk from the age of 12 until he gained admission to the Royal Academy schools. Hunt was extremely devout, and he used the group's painstaking approach to make his biblical scenes as realistic as possible. He even made several trips to the Holy Land to ensure authenticity. The Scapegoat, 1854, for example, was painted by the shores of the Dead Sea, in keeping with the Jewish ritual. When his model died, he painted a second goat, which he stood in a tray of mud gathered from the site. Lifeline. 1844 begins his studies at the Royal Academy Schools, 1848 meets Rossetti, 1865 marries Fanny Waugh, who dies a year later, 1875 marries Fanny's sister, Edith, 1905 awarded Order of Merit, 1910 dies in London. The scapegoat in a Jewish symbolic act of atonement, the scapegoat, bears away human sins. 1854, oil on canvas, 87 by 140 centimeters, Lady Lever Art Gallery, Port Sunlight, UK. Dante Gabriel Rossetti. B. London, 1828, D. Biarsi Chayan Gtionansa, 1882. Charismatic, domineering, and eccentric, Rossetti was the driving force behind the Pre-Raphaelite movement. He proposed the idea of a brotherhood, was the first to exhibit a picture with the group's initials, and inspired the second wave of Pre-Raphaelitism through his contacts with Morris and Burne-Jones. In early paintings, Rossetti conjured up a romantic, medieval dream world, but increasingly he concentrated on pictures of mysterious female beauties. These often reflected the complications of his own tangled love life. Lifeline. 1844 begins his studies the Royal Academy Schools, 1848 co-founder of the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, 1860 marries Elizabeth Siddal, 1861 enters partnership with William Morris, 1862 Siddal dies from an overdose of laudanum, 1869 begins affair with Jane Morris, William's wife, 1882 dies aged 53. Proserpine a captive in the underworld, Proserpine turns sadly away from the daylight, which reminds her of her lost freedom. 1871, colored chalk on paper, 22 x 11 centimeters, Ashmolean, Oxford, UK. The first anniversary of the death of Beatrice is mourned by the Italian poet, Dante, on the right, after whom Rossetti was named. 1853-54, watercolor on paper, 42 by 61 centimeters, Ashmolean, Oxford, UK. Ford Madox Brown. B. Calais, 1821, D. London, 1893. Although he was never an official member of the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, Brown had close links with them and shared many of their ideals. Much of his childhood was spent on the continent where, among others, he was influenced by the Nazarenes. After settling in London, he began painting scenes from early British history. Rossetti was sufficiently impressed by these to ask Brown for lessons, and although this arrangement soon fell through, the two men remained good friends. Later, Brown himself was influenced by the Pre-Raphaelite. This is most evident in his best-known work, The Last of England, 1852-55. The modernity of the subject matter was typical of the group, as was the artist's unfailing attention to detail. In order to capture the wintry setting, Brown painted outdoors until his hands turned blue, while his wife bemoaned the fact that she had to go without her warmest shawl for several months. Lifeline. 1821 born in Calais, but his family later settled in Belgium. 1837-39 trains in Antwerp. 1840 marries his cousin, Elizabeth Bromley. 1845-46 stays in Rome, where his wife dies. 1853 marries Emma Hill. 1855 completes The Last of England. Many would regard this work as his masterpiece. 1861 founder member of William Morris's company. 1878 paints murals in Manchester Town Hall. The Last of England. This moving scene deals with the topical subject of emigration, showing an impoverished young couple forced to leave their homeland. At the time, Brown was very hard up and a little mad, and was himself thinking of emigrating. 1852-55, oil on panel, 83 x 75 centimeters, Birmingham Museums and Art Gallery, Birmingham, UK. Work, Brown's ambitious painting, is a sermon on the value of labor. 1863, oil on canvas, 68 x 99 centimeters, Birmingham Museums and Art Gallery, Birmingham, UK. Closer look. Brainwork. Brown included portraits of the philosopher Thomas Carlyle and the Christian socialist F.D. Maurice as examples of brainworkers. In context. John Ruskin, this English writer-draftsman and social reformer, became the most respected and influential critic of his day. Ruskin's favorite artist was Turner, but he also offered invaluable support to the Pre-Raphaelites in the early days, when they were lampooned in the press. Like them, he was a keen advocate of detail and truth to nature, as his meticulous drawings and watercolors confirm. Portrait of John Ruskin by William Collingwood, 1897. This dates from Ruskin's final years, when he was mentally ill and living in seclusion in the Lake District.